Hi everybody. I'm submitting my top 20 for 2020 entry a few days early this time because on Friday is Friday the 13th and I want to do a ranking video of all the Friday the 13th franchise. And I've also got a Richard Lehman novel review coming soon, so rather than have them all uploaded on the same day, I want to space them out a few days. The theme for this time was your top 20 Stephen King adaptations. Stephen King is my favorite writer of all time. I have, I think, everything that's ever been released of his work, film adaptations, including some of his dollar baby stuff. That's where King will sell the rights to his work for $1 to aspiring filmmakers. And so this was the hardest list by far for me to make so far, because I love most of the films that have been made of his work. Two little things to say before I begin. The first one is there's a rule in this series that you can only have one film per franchise. So I can't have multiple, for example, Children of the Corn films or something like that. And also remakes count as franchise. So if you like both films, like the original It and the new It, you can only choose one of them. And also, I have imposed a rule upon myself for this. I am only including Stephen King horror adaptations. Even though I think The Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me and Dolores Claiborne are some of the greatest films ever made, they're not horror, So, given that the overriding theme of this 2020 series is horror films, I've decided to exclude any King adaptations which are not in the horror genre. So, alright, with that out of the way, let me get on with it. So, number 20 is Big Driver. This is an adaptation of a novella from his Full Dark No Stars collection. Probably his most dark and nihilistic collection ever. Everything in that is grueling, and this, for a TV movie, this was pretty damn harrowing, I have to say. I'm not a fan at all of rape revenge films. They get to me too much, but this was really well done, very tastefully done, and it's, like I said, it is just a dark, dark film. So, Big Driver, number 20. Number 19, The Night Flyer. The opposite of what I just said about Big Driver. This is just a fun time. This is so much fun. A vampire with a private pilot's license going into isolated airstrips and sucking the blood of the poor saps that he finds there. Really cool idea. It's a short story from his Nightmares and Dreamscapes collection. A little gem. Not many people talk about this one all that much, but those who have seen it, pretty much everyone who's seen this always sings its praises. I've never met anyone who dislikes this film. So The Night Flyer, number 19. 18, I've gone with the 2013 Carrie remake, because it's been remade twice. This just about edges out De Palma's original, because this one, what I like about this, it updates it really well. It brings in the theme of cyberbullying and like the rise of how social media is used to bully school kids. So I just about give it the edge for that reason, even though I do love De Palma's original. Carrie. Next up is Thinner, one written under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman, King's pseudonym. It's a very thin film, it's a very thin idea, but it's really well done, and I don't have a great deal to say about it, other than it's just a good time. Good time. Next up is Creepshow. Two of the stories in this are among my favorite horror short stories ever in an anthology. The one with Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson, and the one with King himself. But the other three are also really decent, and I just love the concept of it. I love the wraparound story. I love the kind of throwback to the EC comics of the 50s. So, yeah, and Romero does a great directorial job as well. Next up, Sometimes They Come Back, another minor gem. This is from a short story from his first collection called Night Shift. Yeah, absolutely fantastic idea, really well played. The baddie is is it Grady from Nightmare on Elm Street 2? Nice to see him in stuff. Really cool film. Next up is Needful Things. A pretty faithful adaptation of the novel with a decent cast. Max von Sydow, Ed Harris, some good supporting. It's an ensemble piece, really. It's kind of like an ensemble cast, and everyone plays their part really well. I think that Needful Things is arguably King's last great horror novel, even though it's kind of dark comedy in some ways. It's a kind of a satire on human greed. but it is very definitely a horror novel also from, I think, 1991. And I'd argue it's his last truly great one. He's done great novels since then, but they haven't been horror. Next up, The Tommyknockers. I am in the minority of King fans in thinking The Tommyknockers is one of his masterpieces. Most people don't like that book at all. I put it in his top 5 novels of all time. And, this is a really flawed film because it was very limited in its budget. This looks very, very cheap. I've no unearthed what they're excavating here. It doesn't look anything like a spaceship. It looks like just massive blocks of Lego. But the performances kind of nail the characters of Bobby and Guard. And I love the small town feel of it. They do keep the feel and the atmosphere of the novel, even if they had to leave a huge amount out because it's such an epic novel. So yeah, it's well done for the budget that it had, and I have a lot of nostalgia for this. I used to watch it a lot when I was younger. Excuse me. Next up, another George Romero film, The Dark Half. This is one of King's best ideas. He didn't execute it all that well. It's one of those ideas that are so brilliant, it's not easy to know where to go with it, because the premise is great, but how do you really make the best use of it? But anyway, this is one of the darkest adaptations of King's work. It just drips evil to me, this. It's very, very moody and threatening film. So The Dark Half, and rounding out the bottom 10, Storm of the Century. This is a 4-hour-long kind of mini-series that King wrote. It's an original screenplay by him. Right, now this does have a lot of problems. Stephen King is one of the greatest prose writers of his generation, but he's not always a great writer for the screen because they're totally different skills. What works on the page doesn't always work on the screen, and this highlights that, because there are sections here where it's dialogue where, yeah, in a book that would work because he's trying to set a kind of small town feel, but film is a visual medium. You can achieve this by showing all of these. You don't have to have characters say this stuff and just repeat the same things over and over to each other. Not a lot happens in this. For its 4-hour run time, this could have been condensed into a 30-minute short film or an episode of Twilight Zone, something like that. But why do I rank it so highly? For the very simple reason of its setting. I love the setting of this film. It really does capture the small town paranoia, fearfulness, mistrust that people can have. It captures all the characters of that type of small town. You've got kind of the backwoods, fearful rednecks, but you've also got like the really clever people who are trying to just keep everything together. Similar in that way to The Mist. So Storm of the Century, I do have a lot of affection for this film, even if I recognise its flaws. The director of this, Craig Arbaxi, would go on to do arguably the worst King adaptation ever, which King also wrote, called Rose Red. Alright, into the top 10 now. Number 10, the Pet Sematary remake. I far prefer this to the original. Not a fan, to be honest, of Mary Lambert's original film. This did everything that I wanted it to do. It's a fairly faithful adaptation of the novel, and the book, I think, is King's darkest book. Good performances. Fred Gwynne is such a high bar to beat for the character of the old guy across the road, but John Lithgow did a fantastic job of it, and yeah, nothing. I've mentioned this before, I think, in my top 20 remakes video, so I don't need to go on much more about it. Number 9, Children of the Corn. My favourite short story by Stephen King. Love the idea of, an idea which in principle isn't a bad one, but it's used for evil purposes. The idea of vengeful Old Testament gods. I love that one as well. Evil kids is always fun. So Children of the Corn, a childhood favourite of mine. Next up is Salem's Lot, Toby Hooper's version of it. Again, very dated now. It looks like a product of its time, but it has so many classic iconic scenes that I just have to include it as high as it is on this list, and it's also one of my favourite novels by King. His second book, and the first one where he would nail small-town America. Misery comes in next. If I were ranking these films in terms of how good they are rather than how much I like them, this would be way at the top of the list. It might be number 1, I'm not sure, either this or the next one that's coming. But, very claustrophobic film. monumental performance by Kathy Bates in particular, but also James Caan. Kathy Bates' performance isn't possible without Caan's reactions to it. So brilliant by Rob Reiner. Next up is, The Shining by Kubrick. This probably I would rank as number one if I were doing these by best films, horror films from Stephen King. But, I love everything about it. Well, no, that's not true. I don't love the portrayal of Wendy. There's no comment at all on Shelley Duvall's performance. She's doing what Kubrick asked her to do. But I agree with Stephen King that in the novel, Wendy is sharp and resilient and resourceful and intelligent and strong. And in this, she's just like this shrieking wet blanket who doesn't really put up much of a fight and has no backbone. I mean, I know she does physically fight back, but it's always while she's screaming and wailing and panicking. So I didn't like that at all. But everything else is brilliant about it. Are we into the top five? Yeah, we are. Into the top five, John Carpenter's Christine. The first half of this film is one of my very favourite first halves of a film. I think the second half falls off a little bit because it just becomes a kind of special effects fest for that time. But excellent performances. And again, Christine, a lot of people dismissed this novel. King himself said that he felt it was a dreadful piece of work. It was written at the time of when he was kind of coked out of his mind. But I love it. Again, I think when I did my King novel ranking, I think it was again in the top five. I don't remember, but it was certainly around there. Anyway, excellent adaptation with a really cool feel for its era that it's depicting. Number 4, Silver Bullet. Oh, this film has so much heart and soul. The relationship here between Corey Haim and his sister and Gary Busey as the uncle, it's just such a lovely portrayal of family and affection and stuff like that. And it's a lot of fun as a film. I love the story. Call me dim-witted, but I didn't see the reveal coming of who the werewolf is the first time I watched it, even though going back, it's blatant. So yeah, a lot of fun. Number three. Prepare to laugh. The Langoliers. Yeah, I know that this has some of the worst overacting ever. It has some of the worst CGI ever put on film. But I absolutely love this. It's a miniseries. It's not really a film, a 3-hour miniseries. I love the setting. I'm obsessed with any films that take place on aeroplanes. I have a whole section over there on my wall devoted only to horror films that take place on planes. This is probably my favorite in that subgenre. It's such a cool idea. It is something straight out of classic 50s Twilight Zone. And even though the acting is sometimes not the greatest, it's perfect for what this should be, because you're meant to watch this kind of thing in the 50s in black and white. It's a throwback to that kind of thing. So this over-the-top, highly stylized method of acting suits it, in my opinion. Great story. One of the coolest ideas King ever came up with, and wonderful. I do hope it gets a remake, just because I'd like to see this done with better production values, but I don't think this will ever be surpassed as my favorite version of that story, because it will always just be so special to me. Number 2, It, the original. This is such an important film in my horror development, my history and relationship with the horror genre. Saw this as a kid when it came out. It had a massive effect on me. I don't think I'd ever read a horror novel up to that point. I'm not sure I'd ever seen really a horror film up to that point. Pennywise was my first exposure to the idea of horror fiction or horror literature or horror cinema. And the characters in this, the child actors, will always be the characters from the book. Anytime I reread the novel It, those are the faces that I see on those characters, and those are the voices that I hear. Especially Beverly Marsh, Ben Hanscom. Those two, my two favorite characters from the book. So yeah, it's just such an important film to me. I do like very much the new ones that they did, but this will always be special. Number 1, The Stand. The Stand is my favorite novel of all time, and I don't think that they could have done a better job on this given the budget that they had. Yes, the special effects look cheap and very dated now, but every character nails their role. Like I just said about It, actually, anytime I reread the novel now, it's difficult not to see Jamie Sheridan's face on Randall Flagg. It's difficult not to see Gary Sinise on Stu Redman. Molly Ringwald on Franny. That's how deeply ingrained this version is to me. I saw this when I was a kid, when it came out in 1994, I think, on TV. It was shown on Sky TV. I videotaped it onto VHS, and I just watched those 4 VHS tapes over and over and over again for literally years. Sometimes I would go entire weekends where I'd watch all 6 hours of it just consecutively, just keep playing it over and over again. I was kind of obsessive about the idea of this film and book. So yeah, this is a rare example of King doing a very disciplined job with his own work, because he adapted this himself. And given how massive the novel is, and given King's reputation, he probably could have indulged himself if he'd really pushed it and just waffled on a little bit. But he didn't. This is a very restrained adaptation. It doesn't ever outstay its welcome. He captures every character in a few lines. He fleshes them all out. Compare this, for example, with his own adaptation of The Shining, that awful adaptation with Rebecca De Mornay. Awful because of King's screenplay, which just waffles on and on and on, things which you don't need to see in a film. You know, you just show it, don't tell it. I don't get any of those flaws from this, and I'm waiting in the mail on this Blu-ray version of this to arrive. So that's my number one, The Stand. Really looking forward to the new one coming out. Not wild about some of the casting, but we'll see how it goes. I'll give it a chance. Number one, Stephen King's The Stand. It's been a bit of a long video, sorry for that. Thanks guys for watching. If you did watch it to this point, I will be back at least on Friday with my Friday the 13th ranking, or maybe before that with my new Richard Lehman novel review. So thanks guys again, take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.